I'm going to actually start by introducing this really incredible panel that we have of both digital innovators as well as industry leaders in the space. So I'll start with Kieran, who can just introduce himself, and then we'll go down the line, and then we'll just jump right into the conversation.
Hi, everybody. Kieran James Lubin, CEO of Blockhouse.
My name is Anna Lerner. I'm the CEO of Climate Collective.
Hi, I'm Nan Kant. I'm the head of nature-based research and monitoring at Rubicon Carbon.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cindy. I lead the Carbon Solutions team at Pachama.
Perfect. Well, we talk a lot about digital MRV and MRV in carbon markets and natural capital, but there's a lot of different definitions and ways that organizations use MRV and implement MRV solutions. So just want to give each of you a chance to talk about how your organizations are working with or deploying digital MRV solutions and what that looks like for each of your respective companies. So Kieran, do you want to get us started?
Certainly. So I'm not a climate environmental insider. I'm a blockchain guy, and we got into the market kind of by way of supply chain, actually. So we were perhaps or at least one of the first enterprise blockchain players, and a lot of what we did in the early days of the company was help big organizations understand their supply chains, particularly downstream. So less about sourcing, more about what happens to my products after I've sold them to the first and then onto the ultimate consumer. And around 2019, we found kind of across sectors a lot of desire to understand the carbon footprint associated with everyone's products in a similar manner. So it was coming from consumer demand. So there was a big rise in, I would say, ESG broadly awareness around that time, and that pressure was flowing kind of through the shareholders downward into these organizations. And so they had to have answers about what was going on downstream of them as far as their climate impact, et cetera. So from our side, we were pushed into it. We started to be asked these questions. And we realized that our role would be in helping to understand kind of the underlying climate assets, like many of the other players here, and to help make the markets around them function better. And from our perspective, this comes from a marketplace. So we are not a developer of carbon projects, but we do help them sell their products to consumers heavily and to corporates as well. So from the buyer perspective, which is really where our focus is, MRV and DMRV, really it's about assurance of quality of what the project is, what it does, and also understandability. I think that's a really big challenge. So for a consumer, a lot of the thinking around a carbon purchase, and we actually have a fair number of consumers who are doing these, it's like a donation. It's a feel-good moment to offset things that they've done. Where for corporations, certainly, we're not really active in the compliance markets, but sometimes there's a hard and fast legal requirement, and sometimes it's taken quite a bit more seriously and with more sophistication. So from the consumer side, they want to know that their money landed somewhere sensible. From the corporate side, there's more risk. People are actually starting to sell insurance on offsets. It's closer to a financial asset and liability that they're looking into. And so to that end, they really will dig into the quality of projects. And what we're seeing is that the available projects sometimes are getting to markets too slowly because of current frameworks for MRV. And often that data speaks louder than manual effort. That if you can put a good methodology together and show kind of continuously that what you say is happening, that is better in many ways than manual efforts, site visits, et cetera. I would say that it's early, the technology is early in adoption, and that sometimes even the project suppliers are hesitant to share data with us, and we encourage them to do so, really as a differentiator.
All right, awesome, thank you. So Climate Collective is a climate community made up of entrepreneurs, investors, scientists, and nonprofits. We are sharing a belief that we need innovation and digital technologies to accelerate climate action at scale. So why is that relevant for MRV? Well, MRV has been around for a very long time at a varying degree of quality for development projects and environmental projects around the world. We think that the same ethos applies to MRV. We need to have more innovation around technologies, and above all, we need to have digital MRV to strengthen credibility and trust in carbon markets, but also in higher level policy negotiations around sort of COP and national determined contribution targets, and eventually when Article 6.2 and 6.4 matures, we also believe that we need digital MRV to ensure that those instruments are used to really scale the ambition level of the global community. So what do we do specifically on MRV at the Climate Collective? We give grants to organizations that are pioneering new types of digital MRV technology. And we also support some of our members like DClimate and others who are specifically focused on digital MRV with the regular set of sort of community support that we have for members.
Yeah, so Rubicon Carbon is an interesting position. We buy and sell carbon offset credits, but we also invest in a wide range of sort of upcoming projects to build out our forward supply pipeline. And so we're making use of the digital infrastructure that's available to quantify and communicate the quality of the credits that we're either considering or already have and are offering to our customers. But that's a wide range of data that are available to us, right? So I think when we say DMRV, it tends to be this catch-all phrase. So when I'm speaking to it, what I'm referring to is things like remote sensing-based maps and models that give us an understanding of the forest now and at other points in time, but then also really basic digital tools like a spatial boundary that tells you the extent of a project, right? So those are really critical pieces of data that we need to quantify what's happening and to understand it. And so when we start looking at a new project, we're often starting from, hey, does anybody know the boundaries of this project? Right? Like, we know what country it's in, we maybe have a picture of a map. We have to go all the way down to, like, are there a consistent set of boundaries that we use? Do we have the numbers that we need to understand what the project is claiming its impact is? So I think that DMRV is not just the eye in the sky, but it's also like digital presentation of all of the other pieces of information, sort of across time and space, and then pulling that together in a way that lets us consistently understand it, communicate it internally to make decisions about what we're going to buy or not buy, how we value different projects, and then also communicate that to your point, Karen, to consumers that are interested in that.
So I'm going to probably say some very similar things as my other panelists here, but in a Pachama context. So we are a technology company with a mission to restore nature. And so today we work exclusively in deploying our digital measurement, reporting, and verification tools towards looking at the quality of forest conservation and restoration projects. These are projects that we know are critical to achieve the Paris Agreement targets, but today really only receive about 2% of funding in climate finance, and there is a $50 billion gap to achieve what we really need to solve for. And so DMRV becomes, I think, one component, but a critical one, of ensuring that these nature-based solutions can deliver transparency, because that's ultimately what's required for scale, and that's really what we're after. We work with corporates who have made net zero commitments and are trying to figure out how it is that they can confidently invest in these forest carbon projects and invest in nature as part of their more holistic decarbonization strategy. And so I think a lot of folks have hit the nail on the head here in terms of saying, like, this is one way to deliver transparency. I think one thing to consider as well is that this should deliver cost efficiency as well. We work with a lot of implementation partners who don't know how to enter carbon markets, who don't have the technical capacity to meet the requirements of registry standards. And so these tools that we're developing is intended to make things like baselining change from a 1.5 year exercise to a 2-hour exercise, and shift how we verify the impact of these projects from site visits to verifying the model. And so this should reduce cost for all of the players in the ecosystem and deliver value through to all the stakeholders in this value chain. And so we at Pachama think about it from a landowner perspective, from a corporate perspective, auditor perspective, and ultimately there are more and more investors interested in this space, but they're not going to deploy their capital until this market figures out how it is that we can standardize and start calling a ton is a ton is a ton and actually trade these contracts. And that's really how we're going to unlock the next scale. We need, corporates who can be climate leaders, but those are not going to be the majority of corporates out there. And so how do we change this ecosystem? And so really excited to dig into this conversation today.
Terrific. Thank you so much, everybody. And a big topic that we've heard, not only a little bit on this panel in kind of the early minutes, but also throughout the day has been quality. How do you assure buyers of quality of the projects? How do you onboard projects that deliver real, verifiable, and additional credits? And how do you create data solutions that enable that not only in a way that's quick and accessible to different project developers, but that satisfies the needs of the demand side? So Anna, I'll give this question to you to start. What role do emerging technologies play, like AI and blockchain, in unlocking new DMRV solutions? And what have you seen in some of your work in terms of the landscape of solutions that are both coming to market and that are currently being deployed in both the VCM as well as compliance markets?
That's a really big question. Backtracking for 1 second, I think the biggest challenge, not the biggest, one of the bigger challenges we have to scaling up the ambition and driving action towards this sort of Paris-aligned goals is trust in the system and trust in the actors and trust that the money that you invest or the time and effort that you invest actually results in meaningful climate action. So that brings me to this notion of greenwashing that we talk about a lot. We have a lot of companies that have made claims around what they do and what they don't do, and sort of to cover up or boost a colorful, nice story about a specific project they do, but under the hood they actually have quite a lot of investments that aren't particularly supportive to the environment. We're in a good place today because we actually have technology and data to help us see through some of those claims and require that actors are more transparent with the reporting and their claims. So this is kind of where the technology comes in. Based on sort of digital transformation and advancements in both AI and blockchain, geospatial, IoT, satellite development, etc., we can now know in a much more granular way what is going on in the ground, what impacts we're having, not just on the environment actually, but also on people and the community surrounding these projects. It's not so easy to generalize across all of these projects. We're talking about anything from smallholder farmers improving soil carbon to massive reforestation projects to direct air capture. We're essentially vacuuming CO2 out of the air and burning it back in the ground or in cement in buildings. So this is obviously a wide range of types of projects and technologies that we use to achieve these mitigation outcomes. But overall, what we're seeing is there's much better access to data, and there's much better access to affordable digital technologies that allows us to just increase the transparency and keep claims and keep efforts more accountable.
And then, Nan or Cindy, I want to turn this question to you. How are you seeing standard bodies and project developers and different actors in the voluntary carbon market responding to digital innovation as it relates to MRV, and what is kind of critical ahead of COP28, as we look at the need to clearly define Article 6 and other clear guidelines for moving markets forward, especially as they relate to the involvement of sovereigns.
Sure, I can go first, and I'll keep it short too. I guess to your first question, like how am I seeing the registries evolve, all that good stuff, what we think about it, I think it's awesome. It's really, I used to work at a registry. It's really challenging to get nonprofits to change how they think about the way that they, do business. I also think it's happening too slowly. But that's okay, because everyone in this market has a role to play, and maybe the registries are not going to be the first actors and first movers. It's going to be folks in this room, it's going to be folks on this panel that really help push the envelope on what can be done. When I used to work at the Climate Action Reserve, it's one of the standard bodies. They implemented the California Cap and Trade program, the offsets program portion, and then they also operated a voluntary carbon registry. And we used to always say that the voluntary space is where we can innovate on what kinds of project activities can be credited, and then the compliance market can pick it up. And so I think about the same thing in terms of Pachama's role in this market is innovation on what kinds of tools are needed to really transform the way that registries operate. They can learn from this. We want to be very open about how our models work. You can download our algorithm method documents. It's all on our website. We list all of the data products that we use, which are actually all public. And we work very closely with supply partners. To Nan's point earlier about spatial files, if you go on the registries, you're going to very quickly find that most of those files are highly inaccurate. You're going to need to talk to the projects to really figure out what's going on. And so we're trying to solve this problem so that the voluntary market can pick it up, so that we can push the envelope and really force compliance markets to also behave differently. And so thinking about the role of sovereigns and Article 6, all that good stuff, I mean, we've been negotiating Article 6 since, I don't know how long, since 2015, right? And like every year, they're pushing out more and more the supervisory body on what kind of exact rules are going to be needed. It's a political conversation, and the planet just has no time to wait. And so it's really important, I think, that this community comes together and delivers some trust, and we need corporates to act as well.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point there, that the VCM is where we're figuring out what kinds of project activities can be credited. And I think right now, particularly when we think about REDD+, like tropical forest areas, one of the big challenges is this gap between the expectations of people on the ground who are changing their behavior, and then the systems that organizations like Pachama, what we're doing at Rubicon, others are working on this, the ways that we look after the fact and reassess the actual impact that a project had on the ground. Right? So a lot of the issues that we have in this space are people saying, hey, this baseline was wrong. We can look retroactively and dynamically and then reassess, oh, well, actually, this project should have had this many credits. And that's all well and good in terms of trying to like true up the climate impact. But it leaves us with this open question of when people on the ground, right, the indigenous communities that surround a forest area are changing their behavior in good faith, how do we ensure that they're compensated for their behaviors, and that we don't run into a situation where we say like, hey, you changed your farming practices, but that guy over there did too because some NGO just like came in and did something else, so you're not going to get paid as much, right? Or maybe you should go back to the other thing because that was actually more lucrative and we can't make good on the promises that we made you. So I think that there's a really important problem for us to deal with in terms of not just the benefits of what we can do with DMRV, but also the liabilities that we're opening up and how to make sure that we can justly allocate those risks so that the end of it isn't the financial stream is drying up for people who are trying to make changed behaviors and are the ones closest to the problem, because we figured out how to do really good math, and now corporate buyers are afraid to purchase credits.
I think, Kieran, thinking, more on, the buyer side of the equation. Buyers are looking more for quality. What are you seeing, in your work in terms of what they're looking for in terms of data quality, data standards, and how MRV can support some of that work in giving buyers confidence in these markets and their ability to scale in a trustworthy way? And then how do MRV systems integrate with marketplace and exchange layers as those come online and become part of the digital infrastructure that comprises these markets?
This is a great question, and as before, I'd split my comments between kind of consumers and maybe up to small businesses and the large corporate market that probably has the bulk of the dollars and the sophistication. So on the consumer side, I would still, again, liken it something to like the early organic days. And since we did a lot in agribusiness, we sort of dealt with this sort of very directly, where initially people would just trust you and pay more because it said it was organic on the label. Yes, there's some USDA definition of what organic is, but who really knows, who really checks it. And increasingly, people have been caught out for just making claims that aren't true, and it's tightening, and also the price spread is tightening, interestingly. So it's, still people don't really know what organic means, but a lot more than, say, 10 years ago. So to date, there's not a huge amount of scrutiny from the consumer side, but it's growing, especially as there's more news each year about greenwashing and the like, et cetera. From the big corporate side, there are sort of a mix of players and sophistication levels. I would say in the last year, I've really noticed a shift towards insetting, or for commodity-heavy consumers, big construction companies, airlines. We have a big airline investor, for instance. They want to transact in the commodity of interest and take the bulk of their footprint reduction there, as opposed to, in general. So it's less directly about broad-based DMRV. What they really want to know is that low-carbon concrete, if is really low-carbon concrete. So it's getting focused in the particular area of interest. And we're seeing, and I think probably the market will kind of continue to trend that way, where we see more of a merger with traditional commodity markets versus sort of a growth of offsets in a more broad-based manner. So as part of that picture, again, DMRV just enables larger scale production at better cost. So there's pretty large price spreads between regular jet fuel and SAF, for instance. Very large price spreads between concrete and low carbon concrete, like double the price, basically. So hopefully as the technology to get all that stuff done improves, DMRV is a facilitator to make the prices more similar, and so it's less of a big ask for the big corporates to go through with that sort of purchase. From the marketplace side, again, I think there is definitely room for. So we sell in two models. Some where to the end consumer, we're not unbelievably transparent about what the underlying project is. It's like a basket of projects. For the more retail audience, for the larger, more sophisticated business audience who might buy and hold or buy forward and has carbon forecast to hit, has a finance department, all that sort of thing, they tend to want to look at exactly what the underlying project is, how close it is to their industry, and will do some due diligence in detail on all of the documents produced to satisfy the registries and more. So for that audience, we like to incorporate whatever data we can. If there's any live monitoring of the project, we have fields for that in our marketplace to add data. And it's again been, I have a good friend who has developed. He said he developed his own DMRV on a project-specific basis because there was nothing quite available to do what he was trying to do. Without going into detail, it's still very early, right? Like, I would have hoped to see more projects coming to us and saying, we've got this extra data that proves our claims that should make us attractive at point of sale, perhaps justifies a higher per ton cost, et cetera. And it's less than I would have hoped. And maybe they're not getting the acknowledgement from the market, or maybe it's still just too difficult.
And also want to get your perspective as well on what you're seeing from the buyer side of the equation in terms of how they're approaching this market, especially with some of the latest criticisms that have been made in recent PR issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we're seeing is that many buyers are very, very hesitant to purchase anything that's coming from a RED Plus project, right? So we're hearing fairly consistently, I don't want any of that, I want removals, right? So people are very scared of the avoided emissions projects, and particularly RED Plus projects, where there has been a lot of, reasonable scrutiny in the area. So I think that our work at Rubicon, one of the things we're working to do is to try to enable a little bit more trust in some of those existing projects, right? To get buyers to see that not all of those projects are equally bad, Whereas previously we started from like all of these projects are equally good, right? So we have to instead come back to they're not all equally bad. Here's why we think this one is high quality. And a lot of that comes down to they want to see somehow with their own eyes that the project has had impact. So whether that's visualizations of forest cover change over time, sort of proof points of that project finance is changing the lives of people on the ground. People want to see that there's something real happening there. And if they can't see it, they don't even want to think about it. The other thing that we're working to do is to sort of recalculate the climate impact of the projects that we sell and over-retire out of a risk-adjusted pool of additional credits to try to true up the climate impact for some of these projects. So that's another place where we're taking advantage of digital technologies to, at scale, sort of recompute what's happening and try to sort of risk adjust to give buyers more confidence that even if the project's claimed impact wasn't real, the project had some impact, and we can, go over and above that claim to get back to 1 ton of realized impact, which is what they're trying to transact on.
No, absolutely. And I want to turn the conversation, quickly back to Article 6 because we touched on it briefly. And thinking along the lines of how MRV systems can enable countries to access carbon markets, specifically when we're thinking along the lines of verifiable conservation. And so one of the biggest criticisms that we've seen, of the VCM in recent months has been about the gap between real impact on the ground and what is being issued. So want to think about how can countries, what will that look like over the next couple of years in terms of how they can participate, specifically as it relates to preventing, deforestation at scale in areas of the world that are critical to fighting climate change and preserving ecosystems. So I'll turn that over to whoever wants to take that first.
I can take a first stab. I mean, frankly, I think countries, just like corporates, are actually all at a very early stage of engaging with the market. Jurisdictions today are trying to figure out what are the policy enabling conditions that they need to set into place in order to invite private sector finance to help them achieve their NDCs. There's a lot of talk about who can claim what, who can count what towards what. And I think we have to remember that you have to really be incentives aligned as a collective to really hit any kind of NDC goal. And so there is, a set of considerations around what are those enabling conditions. And then there is the supporting of, technical capacity for these jurisdictions to just even have a registry in the first place. I think the underlying sort of elephant in the room, frankly, is, I arrived earlier and I, heard some of the other speakers as well who have like super exciting platforms. It seems like there's a lot of interest in DMRV in this space. A lot of people are saying they can develop carbon maps. The elephant in the room is what is the standard for a good carbon map? Which is the organization that is going to say that? Today, Pachama we can do a carbon map too, but we don't think it's good enough. We want to be able to build a more sophisticated model that brings in LiDAR, radar, that is site-specific and can do so much more, right? And so I think whenever people talk about DMRV, what is needed, we have to be really thoughtful around what are the use cases of the outputs that we're talking about, who are the users, right? And I think countries are also thinking deeply about this. They don't know if they're going to be the users of the platform, if they want to sort of invite private sector to help them stand up a market. But what does that mean for them? What can they claim? What can they count? And when we think about global stocktake, she almost fell, Robbie. Sorry. These are very tall chairs.
I was almost the first.
Tell.
We haven't
I'm
had one
trying
yet.
to hang on for my life. But, just to say, I think everyone is very much in a learning space. As much as there is scrutiny right now in the voluntary market, I think it's so important when we see someone doing something for the very first time that we all applaud them for being a leader, because everyone else is really running scared, including the jurisdictions, including the corporates. And so I just want to really invite us to sort of, think more as a collective when we're talking about anything climate related, frankly.
I think those are fantastic points. I mean, one of the things that I would love to see us do as sort of a larger community is figure out ways to have the proliferation of mapping products that are being developed be used to enable more trust and not simply used to say like, oh, well, mine says this and yours says that, because if we're not careful, we're going to create a situation where there's even less trust in any of this, because we're now arguing over what's actually happening on this 1 acre, because there's 7 different providers and they each have a different number. And I think from the remote sensing and mapping community, right, we have ways to combine multiple data sets, right? People have spent decades working on this problem. It's not like it's the first time it's occurred to us that there could be 2 different maps of the same area. But this industry has a habit of just cudgeling each other with different estimates. And I think scientists love to get into a room and debate like, well, I used this parameter and you used that parameter and it was raining that day. And, but we have to be really careful that the narrative at large is that we can work collaboratively to more fully understand the world around us, and not that there's only one right answer and we haven't figured out what it is yet.
We hosted a really interesting breakfast this morning where we had invited UNDP, who's providing capacity building for 150, I think, countries, and their NDCs. We have the NDCs that are the contribution to the Paris Agreement, and then we have the Article 6 instrument, which is really about pushing ambition. There are 2 pieces in there. One is about bilateral collaboration, and Switzerland, that was our keynote speaker, is the only country that has really done Article 6.2 deals so far. They've done 12 of them. The most famous one is with Thailand, when they essentially provided finance for the EV system of Bangkok. But I'm saying all of this because part of UNDP's support to these 150 countries is that they're helping them to build digital MRV systems. They're designing them on blockchain because they have learned from this community and probably some others that building these systems on blockchain is a really good way to ensure a tamper-proof environment for this data, but also increase transparency. So in 150 countries, they're trying to establish these greenhouse gas inventories and then digital MRV capabilities. At the same time, we have all these very sophisticated companies, mostly in the global north, that are also developing incredible platforms, solutions, interpretations of data, etc. I couldn't agree more that we need to bring all of these actors together. It makes no sense for us to develop these sort of in parallel. There's a lot of money, a lot of time and energy spent in developing these systems. So our recommendation this morning was a room full of technology companies, including a bunch of very large investors, was that the UN, which is sort of the aggregator of all of these countries, need to create some kind of mechanism where technology companies are invited and can sort of provide solutions or suggestions for how to coordinate it better. We certainly can't solve it here today, but I think it's really it's admirable to see this many people interested in the topic, and I really appreciate you all sharing what you're doing, because I think those advances are really important, and if we can find ways to channel them to these countries, then they don't have to reinvent the wheel and also pay for all of these important technology innovations.
Thank you so much. And a common theme that we've heard throughout the week is that collaboration, remains both an opportunity but also a challenge at the moment. And the same thing with standardization. How do we, reach that point, with all the new systems, that are coming to market? So to close this conversation, I want to, ask each of you to, quickly, talk about the challenges and the opportunities that we see ahead of us related to DMRV, and just to quickly summarize that so that we can close out the conversation.
I would say DMRV still hard, not standard, not widely deployed, but presents the opportunity to take a $2 billion market to maybe like $100 billion or something like that. And in the end, we got a bunch of people working on the big problem. And then we get a bunch of people who are willing to fund, either by directly buying offsets, investing, et cetera, the work on the big problem. And we should clear all of the hurdles, not all of the hurdles for that to happen, but enough of them so that it's easy. It does not feel easy at all. It's confusing, jargon heavy. Some of this is necessary for scientific integrity and all that sort of thing, but no pun intended, big forest for the trees problem in the whole industry. So hopefully DMRV can kind of smooth some of that out with high quality data, good visualizations, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And my biggest worry right now is green hushing as a concept that was not invented, but kind of coined in 2022, where In a survey of 1,200 companies, a quarter of them chose to not disclose any of the climate or net zero work that they were doing because they were so afraid that they would get attacked. They weren't sure that they're doing exactly the right thing and therefore chose to not talk about it. Let's just be clear to realize that after the Guardian articles and all of this, the quarter has probably grown into half or maybe even 3/4 at this point. That is a massive problem. Society today is aligned and knows that we need to do this, and corporations are getting sort of slammed in media for not doing the perfect thing. So if there's anything I can encourage us all, like digital MRV is going to help us keep them accountable. But before we're in that perfect world, let's at least encourage everyone that's trying, even if they're not doing it perfectly.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I see is that we tend to be really focused on the beautiful maps that we can make and not all of the other forms of digital infrastructure that need to exist, right? So we have a proliferation of data providers making beautiful maps, but we still haven't standardized the format that people report what happened in their projects, right? The registries are, even when they digitize things, it doesn't really look like what you would expect in this decade. And so I think one of our big challenges is that we're not investing in the boring parts of the system where we really need to spend some time making it easy for people to report information. And that the opportunity is that once we've got that figured out, people can focus on the stuff that we need people to do. And we can let the machines do the rest of it, right? So the things that humans need to do are build the relationships to affect real change on the ground. And if we're asking project developers or community leaders to spend their time like collating data in an out-of-date Excel template, that's not going to actually solve the problem. So I see this as a place where we can build some really boring tools and then do some really awesome stuff in the field.
I think everyone covered things pretty well here, but I always like to just remind folks, like, tech is not going to solve everything. Like, these are incredibly complex social issues and challenges that we're all grappling with. DMRV, though, is, a critical starting point for doing all of that. I think the other thing I wanted to sort of flag here for folks is that while we're all building these tools, we also have to think about what are the financial instruments needed to actually, invest in these projects. I was at a breakfast this morning where we're talking about shifting corporates from just one-time purchases of credits into longer-term agreements at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, because that's the pace at which nature changes, right? When we are asking folks to change the way that they manage the land, that's going to impact the livelihood for the next generation, you're asking for a lot. And so giving them a one-time payment is just not enough. And so all of these innovations have to happen at the same time. It's going to be super hard, but we have to have also regulatory enabling conditions coming from the jurisdictions to allow the private sector to feel safer. There's lawsuits going on everywhere, not just from your consumers, not just from the Guardian articles. Companies are getting sued over what they're defining as net zero. We have to solve all of those challenges too, along with all of these really hard challenges that other folks have said. But I will just add, the opportunity is definitely there. There's a lot of commitments being made every day. Once they're out there, there's going to be public pressure for how we change, and transition into a low carbon economy. So I do think we can get there. We just have to do it a little bit faster.
Please join me in thanking and applauding this wonderful panel. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me.